Jasmine thought it was just another ordinary day at the office, but when she walked into her boss's office, everything changed in an instant. The shocking turn of events was only the beginning. What would she do next? Welcome to our channel, where we bring you incredible stories of courage, resilience, and unexpected twists. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. Don't forget to like and share this story. It's one you won't want to miss. Stay tuned. This is the story of Jasmine, a hardworking woman. Jasmine woke up like any other day, her alarm ringing softly on her nightstand. She stretched her arms above her head and let out a tired yawn. It was another early morning, and she had to get ready for work at Bright Future Tech, the company she had been working at for the past 3 years. Even though her job wasn't perfect, Jasmine liked what she did. She was one of the top performers in her department, always showing up early and staying late when needed. She felt proud of her work. But recently, things had started to change. Her boss, Mr. Gregg, had been acting strangely toward her. At first, Jasmine thought it was her imagination. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't help noticing how Mr. Gregg treated her differently from her coworkers. When she completed a task, he barely acknowledged it. When others made mistakes, he would laugh it off. But when she slipped up, even just a little, he would make a big deal out of it, calling her out in front of everyone. It made Jasmine uncomfortable, but she didn't want to cause any trouble. She told herself to stay strong, that maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. However, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Gregg was treating her this way because she was black. It hurt to think about, but she had seen it happen before. Still, Jasmine kept quiet and continued to do her job, hoping things would get better. That morning, as Jasmine walked into the office, she noticed the usual buzz of activity. People were typing on their computers, answering phones, and chatting with each other. But today, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, and she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her stomach. As she settled into her desk, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Gregg. "Come to my office right away." Her heart skipped a beat. Why would he want to see her so early in the day? She hadn't done anything wrong, had she? Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She stood up and walked toward Mr. Gregg's office, her mind racing. Maybe he just wanted to talk about a project or ask for an update. But the sinking feeling in her gut told her it was something more. When she knocked on his door, Mr. Gregg's voice called out, "Come in." She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her hands slightly trembling. Mr. Gregg sat behind his large, polished desk, his eyes cold and distant. There was no smile, no greeting. "Sit down, Jasmine," he said, his tone flat. Jasmine sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. Mr. Gregg cleared his throat and looked directly at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to make this quick," he said, without any warmth. "We're letting you go." Jasmine blinked, trying to process his words. Letting her go. Fired. She hadn't done anything wrong. Confusion and disbelief flooded her mind. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "We've decided you're not a good fit for the team," Mr. Gregg continued, as if reading from a script. "Your performance has been lacking." Jasmine's mind raced. This didn't make any sense. She had consistently met her goals and completed every task given to her. She had even received praise from her coworkers and clients. How could he say her performance was lacking? "Is this about something I did?" Jasmine asked, her voice shaky but calm. She wanted answers. She needed to understand why this was happening. Mr. Gregg didn't look at her. Instead, he shuffled some papers on his desk and said, "It's a decision that's already been made." Tears stung the corners of Jasmine's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She felt humiliated, shocked, and angry all at once. How could he do this to her? How could he throw her out like she was nothing after all of her hard work? Without another word, Jasmine stood up. She couldn't sit there any longer, listening to his excuses. She knew the real reason, even if Mr. Gregg wouldn't say it. It wasn't about her performance. It was about who she was. With her head held high, Jasmine walked out of the office. Her coworkers glanced at her curiously as she passed by, but she didn't stop. Her heart ached, but she wasn't going to let Mr. Gregg see how much he had hurt her. She was stronger than that. But as she left the building, she couldn't shake the question in her mind. What was she going to do now? Jasmine sat on her living room couch, staring blankly at the wall. Her mind was racing, but everything felt unreal, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. How had her life taken such a sudden, unfair turn? One moment, she had a job she worked so hard for, and the next, it was all ripped away. The cruel, cold way Mr. Gregg had fired her without even giving her a reason echoed in her mind. She thought about her daughter, Zoe, playing in her room, unaware of the turmoil her mother was going through. Zoe was only 6 years old, too young to understand what had happened. But Jasmine knew that sooner or later she would have to explain why things were changing. The thought of telling her little girl that they might not be able to afford certain things anymore weighed heavily on Jasmine's heart. How was she going to pay rent? How was she going to take care of Zoe all by herself without a steady income? A knock on the door jolted her out of her thoughts. It was Tasha, Jasmine's best friend, and the only person she felt she could turn to right now. As soon as Tasha stepped inside and saw the look on Jasmine's face, she knew something terrible had happened. "Jas, what's going on?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Tasha said, sitting down beside her. Jasmine sighed deeply, her chest heavy with sadness. She told Tasha everything. How Mr. Gregg had fired her out of nowhere, how she felt it was unfair, and how she knew in her heart that it wasn't about her work, but about something deeper and more unjust. He didn't even have the decency to explain. Jasmine said, her voice breaking slightly. "I gave my all to that job, Tasha. I showed up early, stayed late, helped out when others needed it. But none of that mattered to him." Tasha shook her head in disbelief, anger flashing in her eyes. "I can't believe this. You know what this is, right? He fired you because you're black. I've seen it happen too many times. They'll never say it out loud, but they don't want us there, doing just as well or better than them. It's sick." Jasmine nodded, feeling the truth of Tasha's words deep in her gut. She had always suspected it, but hearing it said out loud made it even more real. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about something bigger, about how unfair the world could be, especially for people like her. "You need to fight back, Jas," Tasha continued, her voice firm. "You can't let him get away with this. This is wrong, and you know it. You need to file a complaint, maybe even take legal action. Don't just let him do this to you." Jasmine was silent, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to fight. She had never been the type to cause trouble. Her mother had always taught her to be calm, patient, and kind, to keep her head down and work hard. But this felt different. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. But what if she lost? What if no one believed her? The idea of fighting such a powerful company, of going up against Mr. Gregg and all the resources they had, terrified her. "I don't know, Tasha," Jasmine said softly. "I don't know if I can do it. What if it makes things worse? What if they try to ruin my reputation? What if I can't get another job because of this?" Tasha grabbed Jasmine's hand, looking her straight in the eye. "Listen to me. You are stronger than you think. You've got to think about Zoe too. What kind of example do you want to set for her? Do you want her to grow up thinking it's okay for people to treat her like this? You've always been strong for her, Jas. Now it's time to be strong for yourself too." Jasmine felt tears well up in her eyes. She looked over at Zoe, who was playing with her dolls on the carpet, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her mother. Tasha was right. How could she teach her daughter to stand up for herself if she didn't do the same? She couldn't let Mr. Gregg get away with this. Not for herself, and not for Zoe. "Okay," Jasmine whispered, her voice steady now. I'll do it. I'll fight back. A sense of determination filled her, replacing the fear and sadness that had been consuming her. She would gather all the documents, emails, and proof she had. She would find a lawyer and file a complaint with HR. No matter how hard it was, she wasn't going to let them take away her dignity. But as Jasmine made up her mind to fight, she couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was going to be even more difficult than she imagined. Mr. Gray had been hiding something, and she was about to uncover it. The real fight was just beginning. The days after Jasmine decided to fight back felt like a whirlwind. The moment she filed her complaint with HR, things became tense. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she had no idea just how difficult it would become. The company that once felt like home now felt like a battlefield. People who used to smile at her in the hallway started avoiding her. Her phone, once filled with friendly work texts, now remained silent. She knew why. No one wanted to be associated with someone going up against Mr. Gregg, the powerful boss who controlled everything. Jasmine's lawyer, Ms. Roberts, was a fierce woman who had handled cases like hers before. "Don't worry," she told Jasmine during their first meeting. "We have plenty of evidence to show that your firing was not only unfair, but also racially motivated. His history of firing people of color without proper reason is going to work in our favor." Jasmine nodded, though her nerves were on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was going on. The way Mr. Gray had fired her without explanation felt too deliberate. It wasn't just an impulsive decision. There was something darker, something she was missing. Days turned into weeks, and Jasmine started feeling the pressure mount. HR was stalling, barely responding to her claims. Every time her lawyer tried to push for a meeting or answers, the company found a way to delay. They didn't want to deal with her complaint. It felt like they were trying to make her give up. But Jasmine was more determined than ever. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all the people Mr. Gray had wronged before her. And she wasn't going to back down. Then one evening, as Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, going over the documents she had gathered, her phone buzzed. It was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line caught her attention immediately. "You need to see this." Her heart raced as she hesitated for a moment, wondering if it could be a scam. But something about the timing of it, the mystery of it, pulled her in. With a deep breath, Jasmine clicked on the email. It was short, just a single sentence. "The truth about Mr. Gregg is in the attachment." Attached was a file labeled Gregg's Secret. Jasmine's hands trembled slightly as she clicked on the file, her mind racing with possibilities. What could this be? As the file opened, her eyes widened. There were emails, documents, and internal memos from the company, all of them connected to Mr. Gregg. But what she saw was worse than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just her. Mr. Gray had a long history of firing employees of color for vague reasons, much like he had done to her. But there was more. Hidden among the documents was something even more disturbing. Mr. Gregg's father, who had been the CEO of a different company years before, had been involved in a major racism scandal. It turned out that Mr. Gregg had grown up in an environment filled with prejudice, and now he was carrying on his father's toxic legacy. The emails showed that Mr. Gray had purposely targeted people like Jasmine, making sure they were let go before they could rise too high within the company. He had even sent messages to other managers, encouraging them to do the same. It was a deliberate, coordinated effort to keep people of color from advancing. Jasmine sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. This was it, the proof she needed. Mr. Gregg wasn't just a bad boss. He was part of something much bigger, a system designed to keep people like her down. And now she had the evidence to expose him. But Jasmine knew she had to be careful. This information was powerful, but it was also dangerous. If Mr. Gregg found out that she had this evidence, there was no telling what he might do. He had already shown that he wasn't afraid to ruin lives to protect his own power. With a determined heart, Jasmine called her lawyer. "Ms. Roberts, you're not going to believe what I just found," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We have more than just my case now. We have proof that Mr. Gray has been targeting people of color for years. This goes way beyond me." Ms. Roberts was silent for a moment, and then she replied, "This changes everything, Jasmine. We're not just fighting for your job anymore. We're fighting to bring down an entire system of injustice." Jasmine hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew this was going to be a long and difficult battle, but now, with the truth in her hands, she had the power to bring real change. But as she stared at the documents in front of her, a new question formed in her mind. Would Mr. Gregg discover what she knew before she could expose him? The weight of that possibility hung over her like a storm cloud, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to back down now. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Jasmine could feel the tension in her entire body as she prepared herself for what was to come. She had fought so hard to get here, gathering all the evidence, staying strong through the delays and the pressure, and now everything came down to this moment. This wasn't just about getting her job back anymore. It was about exposing the truth. It was about showing the world who Mr. Gregg really was and what he had been doing for years. As she entered the courthouse, Jasmine could feel eyes on her. Some of her former coworkers were there, whispering among themselves, unsure what to think. She knew that many of them were shocked to see how far she had taken things. A few were supportive, but most had chosen to stay silent, too afraid to go against the company or Mr. Gregg. But that didn't matter now. Jasmine wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to stand up for herself, her daughter, and for all the people who had been wronged. Jasmine sat at the table beside her lawyer, Ms. Roberts, who gave her a reassuring nod. Across the room sat Mr. Gregg, looking calm and confident. He didn't seem worried at all, as if he believed that no matter what Jasmine had brought to the table, he would come out on top. After all, he had money, power, and the company's legal team behind him. The judge entered, and the courtroom quieted down. As the case began, Ms. Roberts presented Jasmine's side, laying out the facts clearly and calmly. She spoke about how Jasmine had been a top performer, how she had been unfairly fired without proper reason, and how this wasn't an isolated incident. With the evidence from the mysterious email Jasmine had received, Ms. Roberts was able to prove that Mr. Gray had a pattern of targeting people of color, systematically removing them from the company for years. As the emails and documents were shown to the court, Mr. Gregg's confident expression began to falter. Jasmine watched as his face grew tighter, his jaw clenched. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, no longer the calm, in-control boss he had appeared to be. The truth was out in the open now, and there was no hiding from it. When it was Mr. Gregg's turn to defend himself, he tried to dismiss the claims, saying that Jasmine's firing had nothing to do with race, that it was simply a business decision. He called her a disgruntled employee who was trying to drag his name through the mud for personal gain. But as he spoke, it was clear that his words were empty. The evidence against him was too strong, and even the judge seemed unconvinced by his excuses. Jasmine's heart raced as she watched the courtroom unfold. This was it, the moment she had been fighting for. She felt a surge of hope, knowing that justice was within reach. After hours of testimony and evidence review, the judge finally gave the ruling. Jasmine had won. Mr. Gregg was found guilty of racial discrimination, and the company was ordered to compensate Jasmine for her wrongful termination. But it didn't stop there. The judge also ruled that the company would have to overhaul its hiring and firing policies to prevent this kind of discrimination from happening again. Jasmine could hardly believe it. She had done it. She had stood up to Mr. Gregg, to the company, and to the entire system that had been working against her. She had won, not just for herself, but for all the people who had been wronged by him before. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. But just as she was gathering her things to leave the courtroom, Mr. Gregg stood up. His face was pale, but his eyes were burning with anger. As he was being escorted out, he turned to Jasmine and hissed, "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean? Was he planning something? She had already won in court, but his words left her with a sense of unease. It was a moment that should have been victorious, but instead, it was tinged with uncertainty. As she walked out of the courthouse with her lawyer by her side, the sunlight felt warm on her face, but the weight of Mr. Gregg's final words lingered in her mind. Was the fight really over, or was there something more he was hiding? For now, Jasmine tried to focus on the victory she had just achieved. She had shown her daughter, Zoe, what it meant to stand up for yourself, even when the odds were stacked against you. She had shown her that no matter how hard things get, you can find the strength to fight for what's right. But as they got into the car to drive home, Jasmine couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, wondering if Mr. Gregg's final threat was just words, or if he had something more sinister planned. The fight was over for today, but was it really the end? Only time would tell. Do you think there is more? Let us know in the comment box. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe as we bring you more cool stories.